Theminist Killjoy, or Tem. My pronouns are they, them. I am a roller derby referee, and with my wonderful friend Cluster Smuck here, we are going to learn some things about being a roller derby referee.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, as Tem said, I am Cluster Schmuck. I'm the head ref of LRD. Also on here, we have two moderators who are helping us kind of collect questions that you ask, and also you can kind of you can ask any questions to, and they are Holtz and Owen as well. So yay for them. Just as a quick reminder, in this session we have a variety of people. We've got people who already are an official, we've got people who don't know anything at all and would like to be an official, and we've also got players who aren't interested in becoming officials but have realized that knowing the rules a bit better might help them with the game. So the way in which we're framing it is trying to keep all of those things in mind. Also, we have people from over 30 countries, and so that also means that when we're speaking, we are speaking from a very UK, European perspective, and so do feel free to share in the chat if we're saying something you're like, oh, that isn't how we do it where I'm from, but we are talking from how we do it where we are from. So last week we spoke about quite a few different types of penalties based on where you're allowed to kind of target, where you're allowed to block, and what you're allowed to use. So we spoke a bit about back blocks, high blocks and low blocks, and a bit about head blocks, forearms and leg blocks. As always, we like to start with a bit of feedback. I do apologize for starting a bit late. My internet crashed and I only got online at 3 on the dot, so yeah. Thank you for those who sent us an email saying that you liked the photo in the email that we send out every week. It's one of Tem's and I's favorites. We were at one of our other favorite refs' birthday parties. And it was great. We've had a few questions about whether new people can join the sessions. They can. We have a lot of capacity, both in terms of these live sessions and also in terms of joining the Facebook group. So please feel free to let people know they can join us. If they could fill in the form that's actually called waiting list, just so that we're aware of who they are, and that if they want to get an email, they can, that would be great, but it's not essential. We have had an incredible response about the site kind of Uradam, which helps us with the track. We'll show you a bit later on, but actually Vienna Roller Derby created that, one of the amazing referees, Wanda Zebra, as well. And they have updated it actually, and they've done far more than we have. So that's the site that we're going to begin to be using, but it now also can show you what happens if a skater goes down or out, and they've made different, more accessible versions, and they are super open to feedback. So if there's any way that they can improve it, make it more accessible to you, feel free to contact Tem or I, but also feel free to contact Vienna Roller Derby directly. They would love that. And then finally, last week we had so much stuff to say, and we really didn't feel like we had enough time to say it. And so we asked on the Facebook group and also sent it out in the email, is there a way that we could adapt this to make it better? So as you can see from these results, today's session is going to be 60 minutes. That's where the main bulk of the topic is conversation is going to be, but we are going to add on 30 minutes at the end for if you have any questions. We are going to answer some of the questions from last week in that 30 minutes as well. And we're just gonna see how it goes. As always, if that doesn't work, just let us know. Tem, anything to add on anything I've just said?
No, I don't think I have anything to add.
Great. Bam, over to you.
Okay, so we're going to start this week with, I'm going to, hold on, spotlight my video. Hello, you should be seeing my face now. We're going to start with a little exercise to try and get our heads around the concept of the distance of 10 feet. So we're going to do some questions. We're going to use the poll feature on Zoom, but please be aware that if you're using just the browser rather than the Zoom app, you may not have the poll function, and so you won't be able to participate in the actual poll. But I would ask you to think about it in your own brains and just say out loud for yourself the answer to this question: which of these things is closest to 10 feet? So a polar bear, kind of nose to tail. A velociraptor, nose to tail. or the neck of a giraffe? Okay. I'm gonna let people submit their responses, and once we've had oh, interesting. So right now we have a polar bear in the lead, a giraffe's neck coming in afterwards, and a velociraptor in last place. I will end polling here and confirm the hive mind is correct. A polar bear is roughly, on average, 10 feet from nose to tail, or as it was described in one of the sources that I looked at, if it's standing on its hind legs with its paws in the air, it's 10 feet high. Great, we've got another one coming. All right, which of these things is closest to 10 feet? A regulation basketball hoop, so that's the height of the hoop. The combined height of Yoda, BB-8, and R2-D2 from Star Wars. A great white shark. Everyone's much quicker off the mark on this one. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Yep, the majority of people are correct. A regulation basketball hoop is in fact, or should in fact, be exactly 10 feet in height. So Yoda, BB-8, and R2-D2 are all very small. They're not actually in scale in this slide. It's a bit misleading because they would definitely stack higher than the basketball hoop. A great white shark is significantly larger. All right. Okay, now 20 feet. Which of these is closest to 20 feet? So a manta ray, which interestingly is the same average width as it is long, so it doesn't matter which direction. Go in a circle. How big is a manta ray? A humpback whale, or a Nissan NV200, specifically the 2010 model van. Oh, contentious here. Okay. So 42% of people think the 2010 Nissan NV200 van is 20 feet long. It's not. It is 15 feet long. The next highest thing is a humpback whale, which is also not 20 feet long. What is 20 feet long is the average diameter of a manta ray. Facts, fun facts. Why do we care about these distances? If you're in any way familiar with roller derby, you probably know that we use the distances of 10 and 20 feet, or 3 meters and 6 meters, very roughly. There's like 5 and 10 centimeters in there, but we don't really think about those. To determine where things happen in a game of roller derby. So we spoke in the last couple of weeks about the idea of consent and about the rules of roller derby being about an agreement that's made between all the skaters and how they're going to play the game. We talked about what they were doing. We talked about how they'd agreed to play with each other, how they'd agreed to contact one another. And so now we're going to talk about the parameters of where they've agreed to participate in the game of roller derby. So roller derby, as we all know, happens on this oval track that we've shown before, but it also specifically happens within what's known as the engagement zone, which can only ever be up to half of the total track. So people can only play roller derby when they are in play. Being in play is a kind of important and interesting concept. A blocker is in play when they are inbounds and upright within the engagement zone. Jammers who are inbounds and upright are always in play. So jammers are in play as long as they're on that oval track and skating upright. Blockers have to be within the engagement zone. Quickly, I will say, be careful. Not being in play and being out of play are two different concepts. Someone is out of play, which we also have this lovely hand signal for. Blockers are out of play when they're beyond the engagement zone. But they can be not in play also by being out of bounds or by not being upright. So let's go to the next thing. So what do I mean when I say the engagement zone? So the engagement zone is a zone that is measured from 2 points, 20 feet either side of the pack. So we judge that from the center mass of the foremost pack skater and the rearmost pack skater, and we go 20 feet from either side of that. And everything in between those 2 points that we've delineated is the engagement zone. And everything between those 2 points is the space where roller derby happens.
Has Tim crashed? Can people let me know if that's happened?
That's happened.
Okay, in which case, let's keep going. So when we talk about the engagement zone, we are talking about a specific area. So we were thinking about it being a particular area. So if you imagine, we're going to try and use different visual tools for you this week. So we'll see if this works. If it confuses you, I apologize. So you've got an area, right, which is like the slinky. And this entire area is the engagement zone, okay? And within a track, you also have a pack, right? So if you think about a slinky, within a slinky, you can let me know if this is all of the engagement zone. And the multicolored slinky is the pack, right? But everything is still playing within the engagement zone, which is really important to think about when thinking about roller derby. And the other thing about the engagement zone is without an engagement zone, you don't have any contact, you don't have any engagement, you don't really have roller derby, which is why when you see a referee saying that there isn't a pack, it's really important that all blockers take responsibility to reform that pack, okay? Which is a really important concept and why it's important that every blocker on that track takes responsibility to talk about it. Not to talk about it, to reform the pack. So who can we count in a pack, right? If we're thinking about who do we count in a pack? The pack is the largest group of inbounds, right? So they are inside the track, upright, so they are standing up, in proximity, and containing members of both teams. In a minute, I am going to show you a visual of all of this if it is all just sounding way too overwhelming and like, I don't understand any of these words. When we're talking about proximity, and these are kind of quotes from the rules, we're talking about within proximity is defined as not more than 10 feet, 3.5 meters, as measured from the hips in front of or behind the nearest pack skater. This is slightly off topic, but the point about the hips is really important. Sometimes if you're watching a game of roller derby, you might see a skater doing a starfish, like you'll see them go like this. Now, they're doing that potentially to show other skaters that they're trying to be a 10-foot marker, but where their hands are as an official is irrelevant, okay? It's not something I'm meant to be paying attention to. What you're paying attention to is where their hips are in comparison to other people, right? And we'll talk a bit about why sometimes pack definition can be really, really confusing for both skaters and officials as well. So then when we're thinking about that, who can we not include in a pack? And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly jump over to another site. Can you see this? Just to kind of show you what we mean, right? So if we have skaters here, and I turn on to see the engagement zone, highlight, where's the engagement zone? There you go. You can see that there are loads of people within 10 feet of each other, right? And you can start seeing, if I stretch this out a bit, that they're still an engagement zone. there's still, but then as this person gets further away, they're no longer in that space, right? But everything here is the engagement zone. But also, as you can see, the jammer isn't included in that. So the jammer standing there doesn't extend the engagement zone. It's not about the jammer. The jammer can keep skating on as much as you want, but actually this person has to return, you know, red one needs to return back. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And when we're talking about inbounds, we're talking about between the lines of the track. So between these white lines as well. And when we say in play, we're talking about this orange area. So going back to this, when we think about, is it working? Yeah, when we talk about who we do not count, right? Because what you're doing is you're trying to find these groups of people. You're trying to count in your brain really quickly as you can. How many players from team 1 are there? How many players from team 2 are there? Who's in the box? What's happening here? And where is that majority? And are they 10 feet? So what you're trying to do as an official, particularly if you're an IPR, an inside pack ref, and we'll talk about who's doing this, so it's not all officials doing this at all times, is you're really trying to see, who am I counting? Who is enabling a game of roller derby to happen by creating a pack which creates an engagement zone? So as we said before, you have to be upright and in bounds. So therefore, who is not are those who are down, and a down skater is defined as a skater whose body part is touching the floor, right? A skater who's contacting the floor, aside from their skates, is down, apart from one hand. Once the skater is down, they aren't upright until they're standing, stepping, or skating, right? So once you're down, you're kind of down, and then you have to be, the official has to see that you are in control, standing up, in order for you to be deemed up. Does that make sense? Let's see if we have any questions on that. If you're out of bounds, so a skater is out of bounds if any part of their skates are touching outside that white line. Where it becomes more interesting is if you are straddling the line. If one part of you is on inside the track and one part of you is outside the track. At that point, you become an interesting part of the game, which means that you are allowed to be engaged on. People can block you off the track, but you aren't counted in a pack. And also, you aren't allowed to engage with anyone. So really what you want to do is you want to get back onto that track again. If you've been given a penalty, the moment that penalty has been fully called, you aren't part of the pack either. And as we said a moment ago, if you're out of play, if you go way out the front there, you're also not counted as a pack. And actually, when Tem and I were at a tournament once, relatively last minute, I was asked to be a head ref. So I had to really change my headspace from being in—
Sorry, relatively last minute, I asked you to be the head ref.
Yes, that's true. So Tem was a ref at this tournament, and there was a game and situation, things happened, and Tem was like, would you like this opportunity? And I was like, yes, that sounds great, thank you. And so you have to change your headspace. That's really important. When you go from being an outside pack ref, which we'll be talking about in a few weeks' time, to an inside pack ref, you're looking and doing different things. But then I also had to go, okay, pack definition. And in the middle of a game, I didn't call a no pack because I thought there was a pack in front of me. But what had happened is one of the skaters who were bridging, they were creating 10 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet, had fallen down. And at that point, there wasn't a pack because part of the bridge had gone down, which meant everyone was everywhere. And I should have called a no pack. And in that moment, Tem came over to me and really quickly gave me the feedback of like, do you remember that rule? And I was like, yes, I do now. And actually, it was a perfect example that I still remember today of when it's appropriate to give feedback mid-game, not even in a timeout, and not. That was the perfect time to give me that piece of feedback, to make sure I didn't do that again in that game. And actually, it's really helped me remember that kind of, who are we counting? What is happening? And it, you know, sometimes you can just get so carried away looking for everything else. So yeah, that is who we cannot count in a pack. So my question is, when isn't there a pack? There isn't a pack if a group, sorry, we've had some questions actually. Let me just look at that. is a hand just the hand? Someone has had head refs telling them hand includes the arm, but not including the shoulder. Okay. What you're doing there with that question is getting the difference between being down and being out of bounds confused. And we will talk about that in a moment. If your skate is on the line, but not over the line, you're still in bounds. Yes. If you've got super thick tape, which you shouldn't, but sometimes like the tape is, if you're on that line, then you're in, right? There should be a rope, and we can talk about that in many sessions time about the kind of the pedanticness of creating a track. But yeah, so back to this. When isn't there a pack? There isn't a pack if there is not a group of blockers from both teams within 10 feet of each other. So there's not two people upright and inbound. So if kind of everyone fell over, there isn't a pack. If lots of people have gone to the penalty box and someone else gets a penalty and they kind of skate off, not a pack. So that's one moment when there's just not a pack. There's also not packs if there are two or more groups of equal numbers of blockers from both teams more than 10 feet away. Okay, pardon me. And what that means is that there can often be no pack because everyone is split up. So at that point, you might hear a referee go, no pack, split. And that's to communicate both to the other officials that things are happening in two different places, because if you're looking for a pack and you see a group of people, and then I see a group of people, we might both think we actually have the pack, right? You know, I'm looking at the pack, someone else. So if you say split, it makes it really clear. And it also can be really nice and clarifying for the players who believe they probably have a pack. They feel like they've got enough people from both teams, but they don't, right? So what do players do if there's not a pack? There can't be any engagement because there isn't an engagement zone, okay? Jammers can continue to skate, but can't engage with blockers, right? So they're allowed to kind of leave. They're not part of the creating a pack. But all blockers have to focus on creating a pack and therefore an engagement zone. And the reason that it's everyone's responsibility is because, as we said, if there isn't an engagement zone, there isn't any roller derby. So how do you do that? I'm gonna say this and then show you on the website. For skaters who are at the back, you have to skate forward in derby direction. If by moving slightly forward, it doesn't reform the pack, you have to accelerate. So sometimes you'll see skaters and they'll be like, well, I moved forward, and they'll have moved forward like 30 centimeters. And they'll be like, I moved, and you're like, but you didn't actually move a lot, and then you stopped. Okay, so it's really important that you understand that just because you feel like you may have moved forward a bit, or you see a skater move forward a bit, as an official, if they don't move forward and skate until they have recreated a pack, they aren't doing their role, and therefore it could be a penalty. And in the rules, it literally says that you have to go to it until an acceleration, right? So just skating a bit is not good enough. If you're already at the front, you have to start to coast, to break, or come to a complete stop. If a blocker is in the front, and everyone's kind of still moving, you have to stop completely. But under no circumstance are you allowed, oh no, that's true. Under no circumstance are you obliged, you don't have to skate in anti-derby direction, okay? So I'm just gonna show you what I mean by all of that, because it's a bit like, what is the back, what is the front, who knows what's happening? Let's go on to forward.
Dahlia, can I add something quickly?
Please do, yeah.
So just on that previous slide, because it may come across as slightly counterintuitive or contradictory, if you're in the front group, you can respond to a no pack warning with coasting. You don't have to actively break right away, you just need to stop skating forward. But the point where you need to begin actively breaking is if the pack is not immediately reformed. So sometimes the skaters in the front group can just go to a coast. The pack has been broken by like fractions of a foot and it comes back together so quickly that actually there is no point where anyone in the front group is required to actively break. If the pack is not immediately reformed, that's when the skaters in the front group need to actively break until they come to a complete stop.
Cool. The the reason I was doing stuff there is I was missing some skaters, so I don't know where they all went. Where is show engagement zone? So when we're talking about the front and the back, we'll talk about this in a moment. We have inside pack referees for these two people here. And this is the front of the engagement zone here, where they're kind of by the jammer, the pivot line here. And this is the back, right over here at the back of the orange. So when we talk about front and back, this is the back, that's the front. So then what you'll see here, if I can just recreate this, is we have 2 red players, 2 yellow players, 2 red players and 2 yellow players, right? Which means it's a split because they're more than 10 feet apart from each other. And even though there are players from both teams, they're both standing up, they're all standing up, they're all in bounds, there isn't a majority. If this skater here went out just over here, as you can see, that creates a pack, right? Everyone is connected within that 10 feet area. So then this skater could go over here and then could skate out as much as they wanted over there, okay? So at that point, when you see a split pack like that, as an official, it's really important that you're communicating between each other as well. Because this person over here might feel that they have the pack. I'm gonna move them further away. There shouldn't be a pack there now. Tim, is there a pack there? I feel like there shouldn't be, and maybe my engagement zone is broken. I'm confused.
I think red pivot is down. Could it be red pivot is down?
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. They've just updated it, so if you double click, it makes them have a yellow circle, a red circle around it. I hadn't realized I'd done that. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Katrin.
Sorry, I was on mute, so I wasn't helping at all.
I was like, why is this not working? But yeah, so that's what a split pack looks like, right? And it can be really confusing because I'm sure that the players at the front feel like they've got enough people that they should have a pack, and the players at the back probably feel like they've got enough people. But that is why it takes a lot of skill and a lot of awareness to really understand what is happening, and that takes time and it takes communication, which is why you'll sometimes hear skaters shouting, I've got the pack, this is happening here. And you'll have all that kind of communication going on.
Can I add to that?
Please go for it.
It's also the reason that we have the specific queue, no pack, split. It's important to know that it's still a no pack. The queue is still no pack rather than split pack, because it's not a situation where there is a pack but it's fallen apart. There is no pack because there is no single group that is the largest one. But we have the additional information split, which is often very helpful when you say no pack and the skater looks at you and says the pack is here and points at themselves, and you look at them and say split, and then everyone is on the same page. It's very helpful. I also quickly just want to clarify, because we're talking about not being obligated to return to skate clockwise to reform the pack. That only refers to reforming the pack. If there's no pack, skaters in the front group aren't obligated to go clockwise to reform the pack. But if you are out of play at the front, so if you have gone beyond the edge of the engagement zone at the front, you are obligated to return to the engagement zone, and you have to skate clockwise to do that if the rest of the skaters are not moving in Derby direction. So if everyone is very still, if the engagement zone isn't moving, if the pack isn't moving, you need to go backwards. If it's going in the opposite direction to you, you need to go backwards. But if everyone is still moving in Derby direction, you can just wait for them to come to you. The only time that you have to skate clockwise is if the engagement zone is not stretching towards you through the course of natural gameplay.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so what we were talking about earlier about being at the front is like, so if there's no pack and everything's kind of here, these people, oh, let's try and destroy the pack. I'm doing this very badly. Yeah, so there's no pack right now, right? Everyone is kind of a bit everywhere. It's very subtle, but there isn't a pack. These people here can stay still. Ideally, they probably go up a bit further, but these people at the back really do have to start slow and then get quicker to reform the pack. And that's what I meant earlier when I was saying that sometimes skaters can feel like they've done enough, but actually they haven't, right? They've moved a little bit, but it isn't enough. And under the rules, the obligation is you have to keep moving until that pack has been reformed. So you will hear, kind of as Tem said, you'll hear refs communicate.
¿Dónde vas? Siéntate. Ponte con Javi aquí. Que papá le necesita.
You will hear a ref communicate between themselves. Pack is here, pack is here, pack is here, pack is front, pack is back. And then you will hear them say it really loudly when there is a no pack, and you'll see their arms go up like this. And then pack is here. And ideally you'll hold it a little bit, right? Sometimes you'll see people and they'll go, no pack, pack is here, and the arms are down. And actually at that point, you've not really been able to communicate to people what is happening. So you want to really make sure that you said no pack, pack is here, and hold it for a little bit longer than might feel comfortable, but it actually really enables people to be able to see what you're doing. And it also calms the game in some ways. When people are kind of trying to rush and get to where the pack is and everything else, an official's role can also be to stay calm, to stay collected, and make sure that actually what you're seeing is what's happening. And that happens by having good, slow, and clear communication as well.
It's also very important for communication between the officials, because the pack is, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a moment, but the pack is predominantly defined between the two inside pack referees. And that means that these two people have to be on the same page about how long 10 and 20 feet is, because actually it doesn't really matter whether the Nissan NV200 or the Manta Ray is more like 10 feet or 20 feet than the other one, because as long as the two pack referees and all the skaters and everybody else agrees that a certain distance is that distance, if people are on the same page and it's consistent, the fact that it's exactly 10 feet or not is not actually what's most important. And so when you're saying the pack is here and you're holding your hands in any kind of position, you're also communicating to the other pack referee where you think the end of the pack is, where you think the foremost or rearmost skater who is defining the pack that you are counting is. And so if I'm pointing my hand, the pack is here, and I'm pointing my front hand at the hips of the skater that I have counted as the foremost in-pack skater, and the front IPR looks at my hand and sees that it's pointing to a different skater than the one they thought was the front of the pack, then we know that we need to adjust and decide whether that skater was bridging or not successfully, whether there was a distance that was maybe very nearly 10 feet that I was assessing as under 10 feet and the other referee was assessing as over 10 feet. So it's really important that you hold your hands out for long enough that the other officials can see which parts of the pack you're pointing to in order to be defining the engagement zone.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And the final thing that we're going to talk a little bit about on this bit before we go into kind of the positions of the officials is what kind of penalties you get. And I'm definitely going to use a visualization for that, because otherwise this is going to get complicated.
Dalia, is it possible to change the team colours?
Yeah,
I had that
no,
request.
Definitely. Is this better? I thought I was making it more accessible, and then I was also struggling with this. Is that clearer? Is black and white better?
I think so. I think that's what's been asked for. I don't know.
Great. So at that point, what kind of penalties can you get? And like, what does that really mean? So you can get an out of play, which means, let's say we've got everything going on over here. This black 2 is skating out. They're still in the engagement zone, as you can see, right? They're still in the engagement zone. The moment they go over here, what'll happen is you'll see that front ref say out of play at the front. Their responsibility then is to return, and the referee will say back in play. If they don't do that, if they stay out there, if they ignore that warning, they'll get a failure to return. The way I remember it's a failure to return, because in a minute we're going to talk about a failure to reform penalty, is they are returning to the pack. Okay, that's where they're going. They're going back, and they're going back into the engagement zone, right? So that's where they're returning to. If there's no pack and then there's no engagement zone, that's not the penalty you're giving. So if they're out here and you hear a out of play, and they ignore, or they continue to block, they continue to engage, they'll get a failure to return penalty, right? So then that's when they get a penalty. If there is a no pack and people aren't reforming, it'll often be the person who is closest to the official who is not doing the action they're meant to be doing, right? And then they will get a failure to reform because they're reforming the pack. And then you will say, potentially again, you'll say no pack again. But actually, if there's been a good, clear no pack warning, you'll allow for the time that is appropriate for people to reform, but you'll go from kind of each team, and the referees will talk about which, how you're going to deal with that. And we're going to talk about kind of the front inside pack ref and the rear inside pack ref in a bit later in the session. The other thing that might happen is if you have a pack, right? You have a pack here, and then this skater one, for some reason, I don't know, maybe the jam is here. They decide to skate in anti-derby direction, and they go all the way over here, and that one goes back as well. At that point, if you saw, there was a pack. It's a real small one. It's really small. It's over here. But this skater, by skating in anti-derby direction and destroying the pack, will get a destruction. And what I mean by that, we'll talk a bit more about what the penalty direction is, but roller derby is meant to be played in derby direction. It's meant to be played by you skating in this kind of way around the track. So sometimes there are actions that you do that if you're doing them and they have an impact and you're in anti-derby direction, you will get a penalty. And I think that's a really important thing to understand about the impact, right? If you think about the fact that you can skate backwards, that's fine. And in future weeks, we're going to be talking about cutting and recycling and what that looks like. Skating backwards is fine, but in some ways you have to think about what the impact of skating backwards is. And there are sometimes you do it, and there are loopholes where it works in your favor. And there are sometimes you do it, and it's very explicitly against the rules. And destroying the pack by skating in anti-derby direction is definitely one of those times. Tam, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, so I would add quickly that it's not specifically about the direction in that case, because if the skater in the front had moved suddenly away and destroyed the pack, that would also be a destruction penalty. The point where direction kind of comes in importance is about the responsibility to reform the pack a lot of the time. On that responsibility, we've had some questions about how fast people are expected to reform. I will just say the answer is as soon as possible, as safe and legal. If you can do something to reform the pack or to return to the engagement zone, you should be doing it.
Exactly. So we're going to do a bit of a scenario now, just to kind of get you thinking a little bit. So we're going to have that there, and then that person there. Where's that jammer? That jammer's there. We're going to imagine all these people have had penalties. They're not on the track anymore. They've gone somewhere else. Okay, so the scenario that we're going to talk about is red blocker 1, white blocker 1, blocks white blocker 1 out of bounds. Red blocker 1, so that's one there. blocks white blocker 1 out of bounds. Okay, so my question to you, although I've kind of messed this up because I forgot to take off the engagement zone, is what happens right now, although in this scenario we're going to say it's, I had some potential feedback. What happens right now if black 1 blocks out white 2? Okay, so that is my question. We're going to do a poll to see what you think about that. Okay, so the question is, what happens if black, in this scenario where you're just paying attention to here, black 1 blocks out white 2, what happens? Okay. So yes, you had some people thinking no pack, and someone gets a penalty, no pack, and no one gets a penalty, and there is a pack. So as you can see, now firstly, if white 2 goes out, there is no pack. There's no pack, right? There's only 4 black players on the track. That white player there is essential to ensuring that the pack exists. So there is no pack, as we've seen, but there's also no penalty. That blocker has to return inbounds to reform the pack as soon as they legally can. And red blocker 1 must skate clockwise to allow white blocker to do so. However, because there are no white blockers within 10 feet of any red blocker, no pack could be defined. All blockers must work together to allow pack to reform as quickly as possible. The thing that's important to understand here is if, when that skater gets knocked out, they just stand on the side and they don't return to play, and an official says return to play, they will get a penalty, right? Because at that point, they are putting themselves into an illegal position by not returning to track, unless they had somehow gotten injured, which is obviously a reason to take yourself off of track. But they should be returning to track as soon as possible. But because they didn't intentionally take themselves out of bounds, there is no penalty for that. Had they been standing there and they skated out of bounds to avoid a hit for no real reason, they just thought it would be better to be somewhere else, at that point they would get a penalty, either for skating out of bounds or for disruption.
Can I add quickly to that?
Yeah,
just
go for
before we go on. So yeah, in this kind of situation, and it happens quite a lot, if there is only one blocker from the opposing team on the track, and in this situation you can see the white jammer is there, that if the red blocker makes there be a no pack by blocking out that white blocker, the rest of the red blockers, no one is allowed to play roller derby anymore. So it would be illegal for them to contact or impact that white jammer in any way. So actually by blocking the white player out here and making a no pack, tactically it's nonsense because the white jammer has a free for all. But the other thing I wanted to say is that while that blocker who's been knocked off needs to re-enter the track, and if they just hang about outside, they maintain that out of bounds position, they'll be penalised for failure to reform. If the blocker who hit them out attempts to recycle them, which is unusual but happens, and the pack can't be reformed because the blocker who initiated that block is trying to force that skater to skate clockwise, it is the blocker who is doing the recycling on the track, who initiated the contact that sent the opposing blocker out, who is the one who is responsible for the failure to reform penalty that will be issued. So the person who's been knocked out has a responsibility to re-enter, but the person on the track has a responsibility to ensure that it is legal for that person to re-enter. Great. Okay. Now we're just going to talk about the other kinds of illegal contact, and we had some questions about this as well, so hopefully we'll cover that now. I'm going to cover this from the rules. So skaters cannot initiate a block while down, out of bounds, out of play, airborne, stopped, or skating clockwise. Skaters also cannot initiate a block on opponents who are down, fully out of bounds, or out of play. Skaters may initiate a block on an opponent who is straddling the track boundary, stopped, or skating clockwise. So this is the bulk of it, is if you are in play, if you're in the engagement zone, if you're upright, if you're within the track boundaries, and if you are skating in the direction in which roller derby is intended to be played, you can play roller derby. If you're not those things, that's when things become complicated. That's when there are penalties. So this is why, even though a jammer is always in play with relation to the engagement zone, jammers don't go out of play at the front, jammers don't go out of play at the back. Jammers can only be out of play if they go down or if they go out of bounds. However, it is absolutely possible for jammers to get out of play penalties, because you cannot initiate a block on an opponent who is out of play. So in a situation where a blocker has gone out of play at the front or back of the engagement zone, a jammer who initiates contact with impact on those skaters would be eligible for an out of play block, which is an illegal contact penalty. And the same is true for all of the other ways in which a skater who is not in play initiates or is the recipient of a block. Now, you can initiate a block on an opponent who's straddling the track boundary, stopped, or skating clockwise, because those are all things that those people shouldn't really be doing. And this comes back to what Dalia was saying before about how if you're skating clockwise, it's technically okay if it has no impact on the gameplay, but it's not really a part of the game. And that means that if you're skating clockwise and someone else is skating anti-clockwise, you can't hit them, but they can hit you. So if there's a mutual initiation between those two skaters, even if they both equally hit each other at exactly the same time and the same velocity, the person who's going clockwise has committed a penalty. The person who's going anti-clockwise has done a perfectly legal block. Now, if two skaters are skating clockwise, and we see this more and more now, that the entire pack, both teams are all going clockwise, sometimes they engage each other while recycling. They try and what you see often, and it's the most undercalled direction penalty in the game of roller derby, is skaters going clockwise, both teams at the same time going clockwise, and one knocks the other one out of bounds. And that's a direction. So that is the end of my illegal contact section.
I've got another question for you.
Please.
How do you define recycling?
Oh, well, I have no responsibility to defend recycling because it's not a concept that actually exists within the rules of roller derby. However, recycling is the term that we give to the action of attempting to force someone to cut the track or to lose position by going much further back along the track by being the initiator of a block on them or having superior position on them. And then while they're out of bounds, making the point at which they have to return to the track, go backwards by skating backwards.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because actually we'll sometimes use terms that aren't actually roller derby rule specific terms. They're things that have become created the more the game gets played. And as Tem said, recycling is one of those words. And I think it also links into when I talked about a loophole, right? Because recycling isn't actually part of the game. There isn't a particular rule that says this is what recycling is, this is how you can do it legally. It's actually about understanding when that happens, how does that make more sense? But we are going to be talking about cutting, we're going to be talking about relative positions and all that kind of stuff next week. So if this is not making any sense to you, let it just go over your head. It is okay. So I forgot to make a slide of the thing I'm about to talk about. So I'm going to talk about it slowly, and if we need to, we'll talk about it next week. But we're going to now talk about the front inside pack ref and the rear inside pack ref, and only for a few minutes, because we are going to have a session where we really go over each individual position. The front inside pack ref, as I said, the person who's standing inside the track towards the front of the engagement zone, are often the person who is responsible for saying out of play at the front, right? And you'll use the hand that's closest to where they're out of play from. So if I'm at the front, I probably wouldn't use my right hand and say out of play. I'd use my left hand and say out of play. They're responsible for checking things like a false start, which isn't something that we've spoken about a lot, but we spoke about it a little bit in the first session about where you're allowed to stand when the jam is just beginning. And a false start means you've stood somewhere in bounds, but not in the place that you're meant to be standing. So if you're straddling, let's say the pivot line, or you're touching the pivot line and you're a blocker, you're a non-pivot blocker, you might get a false start warning. And often it would be the IPR, potentially an OPR on the other side, on the outside there, outside pack ref, who would tell you about that. Really importantly, they would have a say about where the pack is, right? And often the pack is defined by the 2 inside pack refs. And the reason it's done like that is for consistency. If every official did that, you would have more inconsistency, which isn't fair on the players and isn't fair on how the game should be played. So it's often the inside pack refs who do that sharing of where is the pack and how is that happening. They'll often actually also communicate about lead status being opened or closed to the jammer refs. So they're communicating that. If there is a jammer ref, and that's also something we're talking about next week, who hasn't heard whether lead jammer is open or closed, once again, if you don't know what that means, just let it go over your head, then that's something that the inside pack ref would also help communicate with, and lots of other bits of communication. So that's the front inside pack ref. The back inside pack ref, who often is standing more towards the jammer line at the beginning, can sometimes hold the position of head ref, which is a role that we will be talking about in a few weeks' time. But they also share the pack definition. They also check for false starts on the jammer line. And they'll talk about kind of out of plays at the back. So often if you're at a rear inside pack ref, you will talk about, you will use your right hand and say out of play. And then also reform the pack. So you say no pack, and you say pack is here. And sometimes a referee might only want the front or the inside to say that, but often they are shared. So there's a lot of communication that is going on in order to be able to spot all those things. And also, obviously, all officials are looking out for other penalties like back blocks and forearms and all those other kinds of things. But there are some particular things that inside pack refs really pay attention to and have to have a really good understanding about. So on that note, today, we have spoken about quite a few penalties. We've spoken about some to do with illegal positioning, so where you are positioned, and that is this hand signal. It's kind of a chop. With the verbal cues of destruction, skating out of bounds, a failure to reform, which means if there is a no pack and they haven't reformed the pack, or if there is a failure to return because they have gone out of the engagement zone and they haven't returned to it. And all of those have this hand signal if a penalty is given. And then we've also spoken about illegal contact. We've spoken about the fact that you can't block when out of play, only a little bit. We've spoken about directions. We've spoken about if you hit early or late when there isn't a jam or the jam is already over. And then a bit about blocking whilst airborne and blocking whilst down. So we're coming towards the end of the session. Some useful websites, as always, which will be in the week's email and also the Facebook group, are the officiating cues and codes, and they're really helpful. They have pictures on them, but they also have the different verbal cues and the kind of the different level of verbal cue that you can give, right? So you could just say no pack, but you also can say no pack, split, just allowing for that little bit more of communication. The penalty reference guide, which is where these pictures come from, these ones here, and then obviously the rules. Tem, do you want to talk about the exercise of the week?
Yes, I would also very, very quickly, I know we don't really have any time, but I want to just clarify something that I think may be a little bit unclear from that last slide. Because we have here under illegal contact direction, and I just want to clarify that that's illegal contact as in 4.1.3 other illegal contact. So it's a subsection of penalties according to the rules, but that then divides further into illegal contact and direction and so on. So direction is here in this list under illegal contact, but it's not an illegal contact penalty. It has its own hand signal and verbal cue.
That is essential. Thank you very much for saying that.
Okay, and I'll talk about the exercise for this week. So the idea is to kind of take our distance knowledge out into the world on your government mandated, sanctioned wander around the block or whatever it is you're allowed to do. If you're not allowed to do it, you can do it in your home. If you don't want to go outside, you can do it in your home. The idea is that you look at the world around you, go into kind of soft focus, decide on 2 points and go, that point is 10 feet away from that point, or choose a lamppost and say 10 feet from that lamppost is that flower. Then grab a tape measure and check yourself. Just see how good you get at from what distances. How does it change? Do you have to be very close to something? What angle do you have on things? Can you tell better when there are points of reference? Points along a wall, is that easier than in more kind of three-dimensional space? So yeah, just kind of use the space that you have available to you, the resources you have, if you have them, to give this a go. Obviously, if you can't do that right now for whatever reason, there's no need to do it, there's no pressure to do it, but it can be a useful way to get some exercise and exercise your brain.
Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to end bits of the session, but we're going to still have half an hour of questions, and also a little bit of an activity we did last time, just kind of once again test your memory on what the hand signals are. But if you do want to leave us now, thank you very much. Appreciate all the questions and the comments. We hope we covered what you were looking for, and if not, please hang around for the 30 minutes of questions. People have asked whether this course costs anything. It doesn't, it's entirely free. Our goal at London Roller Derby and Thames goal is to do something that's accessible, that helps the community and enables people to do something fun and Roller Derby-esque in a time when it's not possible to do it in the way we'd all really love to. If you did enjoy it and would like to donate, please do donate to London Roller Derby or any of the food banks around where we train in Tottenham, Southwark or Brent. On that note, if you're still sticking around, we're going to do what we did last week, which is we're going to do a penalty at practice fun. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to go on to gallery view. If you would like to be seen, then turn on your camera. If you don't want to. Tem and I are going to ask you about particular penalties, and we would like you to do the hand signal. Tem, do you want to go first?
Yes, okay, so everybody, what is the hand signal for head block? Yay, head block. So I think my screen must have froze because literally nobody moved, and I was like, that's a bit, yeah, great.
I like how you think the entire community was just trying to troll you and be like, no, we'd actually planned to do nothing. Okay, forearm. What is the, yes, okay, we'll repeat it. That is,
nailed it.
Just to be really pedantic, and some of you will love this, the verbal cue used to be forearms with an S. And it doesn't have an S on it now, so it's forearm.
Yeah.
It obviously includes anywhere from the elbow up.
It's also, interestingly, a lot of people kind of make this signal, and I definitely am guilty of it, doing kind of really far back like this. And actually, it's quite important to try and get a nice clear 90-degree angle when you do your forearm. Okay, leg block. Again, I can't see any moving videos, so I think my internet is terrible.
They are doing it, I promise.
I'm sure people are doing it. I'm sure it's happening. I'm sure it's happening.
It does take a bit more time because it's such a rare penalty to happen, and actually it's one of the questions that we're going to talk about, but it is when you're like pointing towards your leg. No pack. Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm so sad you can't see this, Tam. I'm so sad.
I've lost all video.
Oh. So we'll do the next one just for fun and I'll enjoy it.
Oh, here we go. Oh, I just found it and now it's gone again. I'm sorry, Delia, you might have to.
Okay.
Okay, so illegal contact. No, I went too far. I'm sorry. But it's happened now. Illegal contact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, let's go on to some questions. Tem, do you want to, we've got some questions from last week, which we're just going to quickly go through. And then any new questions. So Tem, do you want to go first?
Yeah, just also quickly, if you have new questions and you want to submit them kind of by having a conversation with us, if you have your video on and your audio on, your video may automatically be spotlighted and you will be visible to other participants and to us. To just be really clear, if that's how you submit your question, you may be in the recorded video and you may be visible to other participants. You can just use the chat feature to ask questions if you want to, and you can also directly message the moderators, Holt and Owen, if you want to as well, I think. So quickly from last week, one of the questions we had was to do with leg blocks and people having trouble kind of visualizing how a leg block is really even possible. Like when are there leg blocks that don't just fall under the category of misconduct? Because the difference between a leg block and a low block, and most leg blocks are, so most blocks that are done with the lower legs are low blocks because the target zone is also the feet and the lower legs. And if the
have they crashed? Anyone just nod? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm going to attempt to do this. It's definitely Tem who had thought through the answer. But I believe what they were going to say is often it does happen to both the lower limbs, right? So it could actually in some ways be both penalties. And there is a hierarchy of penalties. So you would often call it a low block. Sometimes a leg block will happen, and this does happen more often in advanced roller derby, where someone has basically got their leg out at like 90-degree angle, right? They are balancing on one leg and they're using that part of their leg to block, but it's really rare for us to see it. Another question is, are penalties more about impact or intention? This is a complicated question, and the thing that I would say is that you can't know people's intentions, but actually you can see repeats of behavior. You can try to read a situation. And often if there is a group feeling that actually, you know, you saw someone, and this does happen, you saw someone's arm go out, right? And it seemed like a real intentional punch, right? Even if it doesn't cause a massive amount of impact, you can have a conversation about that. But it's harder because the thing about it is you can't know someone's intention, and so understanding the impact is something that is really important. And often it'll only be like a head ref who will be able to make a decision based on what they think an intention was, because often, you know, our responsibility is trying to keep the game fair and safe, and there are more kind of grey areas when it comes to that kind of stuff. Another question we had is, if a jammer came into the pack, okay, a jammer came into the pack at speed, and a blocker, so this is, oh, finally I've got an opportunity to use these people. Imagine this person has a star on their helmet. Like they have a star, imagine. So you've got a jammer coming in, and this person, the blue person, goes in their way at the last minute, and they go into their back, right? Okay, so imagine that. They're skating in, there should be loads of room, but they move out of the way and they hit. What is that? If a blocker moves into the way at the last minute, we would think that it is the blocker engaging with their back and not a back block. Okay, so that's why it's really important when we think about initiation, what's happening there. And sometimes you might think it felt like a back block or it felt like a head block, but what the referee is seeing is you moving and engaging with that body part, okay? And often you're allowed to engage with your back. You're not allowed to engage with your head, which is actually why you can end up getting a penalty for something that felt like you were hit in the head, but actually what happened is you hit someone with your head. And that's the questions from last week.
Dahlia.
Yes.
Hello.
Do you want to answer more questions? I didn't.
Did you do the leg block thing?
I think I did the leg block thing. You can watch this to find out if I did it well enough. Do you want to answer any of the other questions you wanted to talk about?
Did you do any of the other ones from last week with my name on them?
Nope.
Okay, cool. Then I will quickly answer those. So I'm going to ignore the first one actually, but the last one, how long after an illegal action can the penalty be called for gaining advantage by a teammate? So I think this question is based on some of the scenarios we were talking about, where the illegal action of one person, the impact doesn't actually benefit that skater who did the action, it benefits the teammate. And how long between those two things can you reasonably say that this action caused that thing to happen? And the answer, as with anything, whenever someone asks a question, how long? How long? The answer is there is no set time. There's never a count. There's never like a clock on it, unless we're talking about the actual game structure clocks of the jam clock and so on. But in terms of how long to reform a pack, how long before you need to leave the track after being given a penalty, how long to return to the engagement zone, how long after you fall down do you need to get up? The answer is never a fixed number. However, what's important is just to kind of track that chain of events. So when you see an action that is illegal, you're watching all of the things that happen as a direct result of that action, or are allowed to happen as a direct result of that action. And those things that you see, if they have impact, if they gain a significant advantage, and you've already determined that this was a direct result, either because of it directly is the outcome of it, or it directly is an opportunity that was provided by it, of the illegal thing you saw, then you can call a penalty. And sometimes it's really long. Sometimes it's a fair distance away. Particularly sometimes people are hit. You see it most obviously with contact penalties. Say someone's hit in the back and someone goes on one leg and balances for 15 feet along the track on one leg, and then eventually steps out of bounds or something. Sometimes the impact comes much later. It can be a long time. You just need to keep watching. As soon as you see something illegal, keep watching until you've decided that that is completely concluded.
Amazing. We've got some new questions. If you want to raise your hand, it might actually be easier because there's still quite a few of you on the call, just to write in the chat, I've got a question, I'd like to talk, and Holtz and Owen will let us know who. But one of the questions I saw is about mirroring. That's always something before a game, all the referees will have a meeting, and you can talk about what kind of mirroring is either expected or preferred. And what I mean by that is some officials really don't like it. If you say no pack and the OPRs then go no pack, some really like it. It can also then sometimes depend on the surrounding. If it's really loud and people can't hear what's going on, you might have more mirroring to really engender that kind of feeling of we're trying to be clear, we're trying to really make sure you know what is happening. But also the problem sometimes with mirroring is the NSOs who are tracking things might think that there is more than one penalty that's been given out. So you have to have that kind of conversation and communication to understand whether mirroring is being helpful or hindering. And another question that we had is, does it matter if you are at the front and you're meant to use your left hand, and if you're at the back and use your right hand? I'm going to be honest, I don't know whether it's in the rules. I would say the more you do it, you might start getting that feedback just to kind of really refine your positioning. The reason I think it does matter is it is easier for a skater if they are this arm, and it does depend on your own positioning. So I'm left-handed. It isn't always instinctual to kind of, but actually the more you practice it, the more it will just make a lot of sense. And it also helps visually that you're saying no pack, it's the no pack at the front, because it's possible that you might be the only IPR. It's possible the other IPR might be busy. And so if you say no pack back.
You mean out of play, just to be clear.
Oh, sorry, yeah, out of play, thank you. If you say out of play at the back, it can help with that visualization of where the front is and where the back is. So I would say it's not the most essential thing immediately to be like really, really focusing in on, but I would say it's something that you shouldn't be training yourself to do incorrectly, because there are other values to doing it. Tem, any questions?
Can I add something quickly to that before we go into the question, because it was a question. So I would say it's absolutely valid. Like if you can't do it, if for any reason, if you need to adjust the signal, it's absolutely fine. But that information should be given to the teams in the captains meetings so they know what to expect. For example, if the front IPR doesn't have a left hand and is therefore going to do out of play with their right hand, it's very valid, but people need to be able to be prepared for it, because it's not always, as Dalia was saying, you're not always giving the call about being in the front or in the back. Now, the time when that happens the most often is after an illegal star pass. A pivot who thinks they're a jammer is out of play at the rear of the engagement zone because they've skated all the way around the track. Now they're out of play at the front, even though they are behind the pack. So if the front IPR is the one that's seen it and they're chasing them, or if you're the rear IPR and you know that that skater is out of play, if you use your left hand to say out of play, you're telling that pivot that they're out of the engagement zone at the front, even though they're behind the back. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Question.
Alex Arsovsky.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was unmuted and that it was my turn. Yeah, I had a question about direction. It's one that kind of confuses me quite a bit. Is it only skating actions that can trigger it, as in you moving into positions that are breaking up the pack, or is it actions like contact and engagement with the other team that is causing them to now create a no pack scenario that can also create cause a destruction penalty? I was just wondering if you can go over a couple of scenarios maybe.
Dalia, do you have anything to say specifically? No, I'm gonna say some things. So I just want to clarify, are you talking about destruction or direction?
Destruction, sorry, did I say direction?
You said both things, so I just wanted to. It's okay.
My head, I was like, don't say direction, and of course I said it.
It's all good. Just so I'm answering the right question. Yeah. So I think as with all contact penalties, or with all penalties, what you're looking for is the impact. And so if you make contact with someone that is illegal, breaking the pack is sufficient impact to warrant a penalty. So as we were talking about last week, if you back block somebody, or you push someone out of the engagement zone, or any of these things, contact penalties that lead to a destruction of a pack will always be considered the contact penalties rather than a destruction penalty, because it's a contact penalty with impact. Because the only way for it to destroy the pack is for that person to go like down or out of bounds or whatever. Now, in situations where things aren't sufficient impact for a contact penalty, but it does lead to a destruction of the pack, and I'm trying to think of a situation where that's true. So the scenario that we did talk about was where someone legally blocked someone out of bounds, and that led to a destroyed pack. And there's no penalty for destruction there because it's perfectly legal to block someone out of bounds. It's just that the pack has been destroyed. So sometimes the pack is destroyed just through natural legal gameplay. The pack is only really destroyed actively by people taking like illegal positions, by going out of bounds or by adopting a down position, or by moving. So we do think about it mostly in terms of skating actions moving in any direction. I don't know if that actually answers your question.
Yep, thank you so much.
Okay.
Any other questions? I think the mod said that we had a question lined up.
Yeah, so there was a question that's come up about some points and things. So next week is Jammer Referee Master Session. So
we forgot to say.
Fear not. The answers to those questions will be coming.
Yeah, next week, just for anyone who's left, we have a special guest ref called Kilobyte, who refed at WFTDA Champs last year to be going with Tem, who also refed at WFTDA Champs, because we thought, you know, we might as well utilize this being online and getting sort of the best, in my opinion, jam refs in the world to teach this stuff. What other questions do we have?
I had one. So does it matter which side we visualize most of those penalties on, like forearm this way versus this way?
I don't think for most of the other penalties it matters which arm it is, but I'm going to think about this through carefully. So like forearm, I don't think it matters as long as it's clear that you think about, you know, can the NSO see it, can the skater see it, you know, that kind of stuff. But I don't think that matters as much. Back block is both hands. Leg block is often, it's now meant to be towards the leg that they did the block of.
Okay.
So your left leg, or your left leg or right leg. I think.
So for me, generally, it is if you can do it in exactly the way that it is put out in the codes, cues, and signals document, then do it. For some of them it specifies, and for others it doesn't. So for example, in the forearm one, it says hold your forearm vertically in front of your chest, or fold your arm, belt at the elbow. So there are, if the description doesn't specify which hand to do it with, it's okay to do it with either one.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking up where the low block says it, because I've only ever done it to like the right bit of my.
I don't think any of them specify, to be honest. Okay. I think it's important.
Yeah. Any other questions? Is there a rule how far we've done that one already? I think we've done all the questions we've been sent. So if we haven't answered it, can you re-ask it, please? Or just say it. Just unmute yourself and we'll see if chaos ensues. Otherwise, we're good.
Everybody speak. All 150.
Oh, someone said something. I'm not sure where this goes into in terms of other questions that happened before, because I haven't really been keeping an eye on the chat, which is the above the knee also bothers me. If it's above the knee and you're 5 foot tall, and if you're 6 foot tall, it is dependent on your body in that way. And actually you'll see it where someone is really tall, or if someone has like, you know, then it really varies as to what penalties or what practice skaters have to do in order to try and avoid particular penalties, right? Because actually, if you are a shorter jammer, for example, you might more often get that you're blocking with your head, or you might get this, or you might get that, and it really varies depending on the person, and also just the bad practices that sometimes people pick up, which is why often teams will do drills where, you know, they really try and keep their forearms in, or they'll do drills where they really try and practice this, or skaters will try and experiment with something and moving in a different way because they regularly get a particular penalty. It could be to do with their height. It could also just be to do with how they learned to skate, and they've picked up a habit that they're trying to now avoid, or the rules have changed and they've had to adapt around that. Which an example of that is actually with low block. There was a change to the rules that meant natural skating, and if you low blocked someone, could get you to get a penalty. And that's because some people's crossovers were so large that they were tripping people up. And I think that's one of the reasons. I actually don't know. I'm not involved in the creation of any of these rules. And so actually they added it in that a low block, even a natural, you know, it's not intentional as such, right? They're just skating and you knock someone over. If that then creates an impact, that can be a low block, right? And that's a change to the rules. So some skaters, I imagine, will have had to have changed how they skate in particular circumstances to then not be getting excessive low blocks. Have any other questions?
I don't think there's someone said that someone was going to be unmuted. I don't know if it's going to happen.
Holtz, you said someone had a question. Anyone got a question?
From chat, if there isn't.
Is charging still a penalty? The verbal cue of charging, which is, you know what, it's been such a long day, is when you lean off of a down player. Is that right, Tem?
Sorry, what's the question?
Charging. Is charging still a thing? And it's when you kind of balance off of a down player.
Blocking a skater who's down.
He's down, yeah. The verbal,
It's illegal contact.
yeah, it's illegal contact. It's still not allowed. You're still not allowed to block someone who is down, but it's not a verbal cue that is used. I imagine if you used it as an additional verbal cue, there probably wouldn't be an issue with that.
Yeah, it's perfectly valid as secondary information. The primary verbal cue is illegal contact.
Okay, question from the chat. If there is no blockers of a team on the track and the opposite jammer passes through the no pack, is actually scoring any points? So what's interesting about that, you can't have a situation where there are no blockers from any team on a track. What often will happen if someone has got a penalty is you will hear something that says, you know, red 3, 2, 1 forearm, remain on the track. Or it might even be they say remain on the track and then forearm. It depends on how they're communicating, but you'll do that to enable there to be a pack in place. So you have given them a penalty. You've told them to stay on track. If they leave the track because they've heard a penalty, they won't get a penalty for destroying the pack, because at that point it's been a bit confusing and that maybe they didn't hear that last bit, but they do have to return immediately. So at that point, they number one, there should never not be a pack in that way. And then number two, we'll talk more about whether they get any points.
I would just say, sometimes it does happen that there are no blockers from the team because people leave erroneously. The last blocker has to go and deal with an equipment issue, so there's no destruction, for example. It absolutely happens that there are situations where there are only blockers from one team on the track and that a jammer passes through that pack. We will go over scoring more thoroughly next time, but the basic answer is yes, you get all the points. If you complete a scoring trip with no opportunity to score points on any opposing blockers because they're not there, you score all their points automatically.
Tim, we've had another question. How can I practice pack definition in game situations? The mental load is very different from doing it theoretically on a sheet or on a website. How can I practice to focus?
So the main thing for me that I found helpful was using starting with the visualization of the pack as being counting people who meet the appropriate conditions. So that's why we framed it that way in this session, that defining the pack is counting people who are upright, in bounds, and within 10 feet of each other. And the best thing to do is to try and just step back, do no other officiating responsibilities if you can at a scrimmage, stand in the middle of the track and don't do anything else. Try and have no other jobs, and if you can, just look, let your kind of eyes focus softly, so you're just taking in everything at once, and try and count, just purely count how many people are meeting the conditions of being in a pack. Now, at first, the 10-foot distance can be quite hard. So if you just count, try and keep a running count, how many people are upright and in bounds, blockers specifically. So how many blockers are upright and in bounds? So you just stand in the middle of the track, follow people moving around, and try and know at any given moment, if the jam were to stop and one of your referee pals were to turn around to you and say, how many people are in play right now? Can you answer that question? And that's not a question you'll ever have to answer necessarily in the middle of a game. It's not like a be all and end all test of whether you can be a pack referee, but it's an exercise for training your focus to be able to notice who has like what status at any given time, and to be able to see in kind of a soft focus way when people step out of bounds, when people fall down, and how that number changes. And then when you add in the kind of distances, you start assessing like these people are this far away from each other, this person's this far away from someone that's down, and you'll be able to piece it all together like a jigsaw puzzle. The other thing that can be useful is to focus on a point or identify points where a pack might fail. So in the situation like that Dalia described in the tournament in France, where the blocker who fell down broke the pack, is to kind of go, well, the pack is these 5 people, but if this person here goes out of play, either by stepping out of bounds or by falling down or by disappearing entirely, or being penalized, if this blocker here is no longer here, then there's no pack. And kind of identifying all the possible situations in which one person changing their in play or out of play status would result in there being no longer a pack. And that means that you're really ready. For example, if you've identified that this blocker, if they become out of play, then there's no pack. And then they hit a jammer and they get given a back block penalty by an OPR, and the OPR says that number, and you've just identified, oh, that skater, if they're not in play anymore, then there's no pack. You could immediately yell no pack and hold your hands up. And the same for if this person goes down, that moves the pack over here.
Yeah. The thing also I would say is just having a lot of patience. It took me, I'd say, nearly a year to feel confident with my IPRing. It really will take time for your brain to begin to see where the pack is, and then building on like who destroyed it, and just having the patience with yourself is really important. You will get there, but it's about building it up, as Tem said. We're going to just take one more question, and then it is half past. And one of them was, if the penalty box is full, all the blockers are seated, everyone's on track, but more people on track are in the queue, how do you communicate about that? So as soon as someone stands up, the penalty box manager, a non-skating official, will often have a whiteboard, and they will have a number on it saying, you know, yellow 321. And at that point, it's often for one of the officials to say yellow 321, report to the box. They will be aware that they are in the queue because they will have probably gone to the box unless they've been asked to remain on track. But at that point, they still will be aware. And it's just the responsibility of one of the officials on the track to tell them to head off, because they're often, you know, busy playing the game. On that note, thank you very much for all your questions. We hope this extra half hour was helpful to you, and we look forward to seeing you next week. As always, any feedback, either the Facebook group or officials@londonrollerderby.com. Have a great week. Stay safe. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.